take this one out if you want.
Oh, thank you. Actually, it's called What Is It Like? More enigmatic. What is it like being you now? I'm serious. Keep still a moment and just think, what is it like being me now? Isn't that what we're talking about? Consciousness and how it changes. What it's like, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, I want to begin by telling you a little story. Now, the significance of this will become clear, I hope. So, a long time ago, we're talking early 1980s, I had a revelation. One of those wonderful insights that you know is really amazing. And I can remember where I was sitting at the time in our little old stone cottage in Somerset with a friend, very stoned, very high, looking at a bookshelf on this damp floor, because it was a damp cottage. I remember all this very clearly. And I had this sudden, amazing revelation. You have to take the top layers off. Well, you know what happens then. I wrote it down. Next morning, what on earth does that mean? And it's taken me 40 years. I never forgot it. I wrote about it elsewhere later on. I mean, I just jotted it down again. Oh, I remembered that again. Taken me 40 years, and that's what I really want to talk about. I thought it would be particularly nice to wear the same thing that I'm wearing in that picture. Thank you. It's actually, I bought this in 1970, and I've never let it go. So, I must get on with the story. So, what my story is about is that the other thing that I realized, which one can you, yeah, I can see the next one. I'm not used to this clever system. What I also was thinking about at that time, and again, I'll come back to this 40 years later, is it's all models. So when you then were thinking, do it again, what is it like to be me now? Well, if you're looking at me, you can't see the room behind you, but you kind of know it's there. If you keep your eyes on me, you know if you look to the left or the right, you'll see the other people. That's got to be a model. That's got to be what your brain's doing, because you're not actually looking at it. And this, through my long years of meditation, I mean, by then I'd only been meditating seriously for about 5 years, but with psychedelic experience as well, I became more and more convinced that all our experience is models. But I didn't know what that meant. Even so, in 1985, I only discovered this recently, and I've put it on my website, that it exists in a book from this conference. I wrote this paper called What It's Like to Be a Mental Model. Don't bother to read it, I'm coming back to it later. What it's like to be a mental model, I was thinking, there's nothing it's like to be a physical object. It's the models that are conscious. But I couldn't make any sense of that because I didn't know what a model was. I'm not a philosopher. I had not done a degree in philosophy. I couldn't imagine what it would mean that my ideas or the visions of the colors I can see were a model. What does that mean? How does a brain make ideas? It was all too difficult. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that the science of consciousness would help us understanding these things, would help us to know what is altered in an altered state of consciousness, like when you take psychedelics. But I've been involved in the field of consciousness studies since its beginning in the 1990s, and I think it's in deep trouble. It's dug itself a pit that at the moment it can't get out of. So consciousness studies began, you could say, it was certainly the 90s, you could say with Dan Dennett's wonderful book, Consciousness Explained, in 1991. Or you can say 1994, when it was the first Tucson conference. Who's been to one of the Tucson conferences? Oh, only a couple of people. Gosh. They're good fun every 2 years in Arizona. And that has gone on since 1994. But we have problems. So here's the first problem. We have a lot of theories. Lots and lots and lots of theories. I've read one paper recently that compares 5 theories, another one that compares 7 theories, another one that lists 22 theories, and there's been a massive several hundred-page review of the whole field, which includes loads more theories. They can't all be right. Could they all be wrong? Or, well, I would say that we got it wrong from the start and that all these theories are built on the same mistake. I mean, this is a wild claim. And I don't, if you come back at me and say that's stupid and crazy, okay, but let me at least have a go at the idea. So, where was the beginning where I think we went wrong? And I'm sure you can guess from this that the beginning is as follows. So we don't have a definition. It's very weird, isn't it, to have a field called consciousness studies, but you can't define consciousness. I mean, hang on a minute, here's a question. Are you conscious now? Hands up if you were when I asked. Hands up anybody who wasn't. Yes, good. I'd love to ask you, but there are too many people here. You might either be saying, well, I don't know what consciousness is, so I'm not going to answer. You could be having one of those people who has this odd experience that, well, I realized that until you said it, I wasn't really there. Or you could say I wasn't mindful. You could say I sort of popped back into existence. I became mindful. I became here when you asked a question. This implies that there's a bit of a problem about consciousness because when we look into it, it's different from when we're the most of the time. William James had a wonderful saying about this. He said, introspection of this kind is like turning up the gas quickly enough to see how the darkness looks. He'd have loved electric switches, wouldn't he? You can turn on the light even more quickly to see how the darkness looks. That's what I mean about consciousness. When you ask about it, you're here, you're conscious. This is what we're trying to explain. But most of the time we're not mindful, we're not here. The brain's going off doing its stuff, and we can come back when we want to. So the beginning was this very famous question by the philosopher Thomas Nagel, and he asked this famous question, what is it like to be a bat? There are good things, in my opinion, good things and bad things about this. The good thing is it pointed the field towards what matters to us. What is it like? What I'm getting you to, and I hope you're still doing it while I'm talking, feeling, what is it like to be me now? What is it like? That was very useful, and most people have built on that. What was not so useful is that he was talking about the physical bat, saying it's the bat, this physical thing with wings and fur and skin and claws and everything else, that is the subject of consciousness. But if you do that, you are making a split between mind and body, mind and brain, a split between objective things like bats and subjective experience, between the inner world and the outer world. And that inevitably means that you've got the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem besets us still. So let me just summarize the hard problem for those of you who don't know about the hard problem. We're going back to Tucson, 1994, the first ever consciousness conference there. And the then young, gorgeous, long-haired Dave Chalmers, who was young and nervous and giving, in his description, an incomprehensible, very boring, very detailed philosophical treatise on something or other, which he was going to read. And before he read it, he said, I just want to be clear that I'm not talking about the easy problems, like how the brain works and so on. I'm talking about the hard problem of consciousness itself. That's what stuck, and that became the famous hard problem of consciousness. And he described it later in his books and writings. It's the question of how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. And he contrasted that with the easy problems and asked, why is the performance of these functions, memory, perception, so on, accompanied by experience? I want you to note two things about this. One is gives rise to, telltale sign. And you'll find all through consciousness studies people trying to explain how consciousness arises from this brain function or that brain function or this bit of the global workspace or that bit of integrated information produces it or whatever. Again, it's a kind of dualist assumption, and accompanied by is a dualist assumption. Now, to be fair, Dave Chalmers is a dualist, a very subtle kind of dualist, not a Cartesian dualist, but that's inevitable given that he believes the hard problem is a real problem. And a lot of people, not just me, think that it's not a problem or it's not the right problem because we've got it wrong from the start. It's just me who says that extreme. And it's clear that that is what people meant. They mean the actual physical object. And I'm denying this. This is the whole point of my talk. I'm saying it's not physical things that are the subject of consciousness. It's mental models. So Chalmers says it's undeniable that some organisms are subjects of experience. Well, I'm denying it, even if he's not. And Nagel makes the same assumption. He says the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means basically there's something it's like to be that organism. So it's the physical thing that is conscious, and you've therefore got dualism and the hard problem. You can't escape it. I'm not solving the hard problem, I'm evading it completely by saying we've got it wrong. It's not physical objects. They are as much models. I mean, to me, you're physical objects, but that's because this thing's modeling you lot. Sorry, you're just models. It feels different from your point of view. But there's a problem. Let's look again at that pretty picture. My son did all these pictures for my consciousness textbook. And I love them. They're just very sweet. So we have a sweet little spider there. Now, how do we know if that spider is conscious? Or the bat, or the owl, or the snake, or the tree? Well, we don't. We can't find out. I mean, you can't ask the spider. I can ask you. Well, do I believe you? And what do you know about your own consciousness? Even that's tricky. But at least speaking people, can say. But then you can make a little tiny robot with hardly any bits in it that just has a tape, a chip that says, I am conscious, I am conscious. And you don't know. I mean, you simply can't tell. Even so, there are people in consciousness studies now trying to detect consciousness. Loads and loads of writings about is a baby consciousness. I'm sorry that the babies that are around are not here for you to look at. But you can look at these plants. I mean, lovely plants here. Are they experiencing something? How can we know? We can't. All we can do is do tests of what people say or how their brains work or whatever. This is just one recent article that has all this list of different ways of trying to get at consciousness. And of course, what they're doing is getting at behavior and measures of brains and so on. So, well, this is my conclusion. It's all bonkers. And I mean it. I think we've got ourselves dug into this problem, and all these attempts to solve it are not actually helping at all. So this is why I'm suggesting that it's not the physical entities that are conscious, but the mental models they construct. How is the time going? There must be somebody there with some things to wave at me. What? Thank you. He's 28. No, he's got it. He's got as muddled as I am. 12 left. 18 left. Okay, it's fine. So that's why I'm making this rather radical suggestion that it's the mental models that are the subjects of experience. So now I want to go back to that paper that I wrote in 1985. The weird thing is, as I explained at the beginning, I couldn't understand what a mental model was, and I gave up on the idea, but it went round and round in my head all the time, along with this idea of you have to take the top layers off. And what I wrote then in 1985, I probably wrote it in 84 or 83, I'm not sure, I think I would write exactly the same today. So allow me to read it. Amidst all the arguments about the nature of consciousness, it's usually assumed that consciousness is primarily a property of humans, brains, or information processing systems. I suggest instead that it's a property of the models or representations of the world that such systems construct. I propose that all such models are conscious. Indeed, being conscious is simply what it is like being a representation of a world. That's what I'm trying to get over now, and I'm trying to understand myself, and I'm trying to deal with the inevitable problems that come up from it. But there are many advantages, and I'm not going to go through them as I would in a different situation, but just to point out one or two. You see, if we ask what it's like to be a bat, or even a baby, or a spider, we can't know. But if we ask what is it like to be the model that the spider or the baby produces, we can know. This is what, to me, is the whole point of this, is what I feel now. Because we can know, at least in principle, we can know. Because we can look at any organism or AI system or whatever and find out from what's going on in that system what kind of models it's building. That we can look into a human brain with scans and so on and see how, for example, with psychedelics, we can see how the default mode network is weakening, the long-range connections are weakening, there's more activity in the parts of the visual cortex. We can see these things going on, presumably in more and more detail as the years go by. And that will be telling us what kind of models that a system is building. So that's, the way I would put that is, we can know what it's like to be a mental model because it's whatever that model says it's like. If the spider is capable of actually having a model of its web, then what it would be like to be the spider is having a feeling of making this particular web. If, as I suspect, the spider has no idea of the shape, it's simply mechanically producing following an algorithm to produce it, then that would not be part of its model. But where its legs are, it has to have a body schema, like we have body schemas, you know, where our arms and legs are all the time. I couldn't stand up if I didn't. And we can see whether, as I suspect, the spider does have a body schema. And so we can answer the question, at least in principle. This is a huge advantage and gets us out of the horrible problem. So we can also then say, which of these is conscious? Because if it has models of its world, then the answer is yes, but very different types of consciousness for the different ones. But you see, I hit this buffer long, long ago of what could a mental model be, and the reason I'm standing here now and able to talk about this is because of predictive processing theory. Now, I imagine that there are quite a few of you here who know more than I do about predictive processing theory and Bayesian mathematics, because I'm not terribly good at Bayesian maths. It's difficult stuff. And there are probably some of you who don't know anything. Are there some of you who don't know anything about predictive processing? Yeah. So I will try and just briefly explain how it works. This is a theory that has been around a little while, but it's really suddenly taking off within brain science, neuroscience, as being an understanding of what the brain is doing. So rather than what is intuitively the way the brain feels, which is that I'm looking out at the world, all this information is pouring into my head through the eyes, through the ears, through the skin, and it's all kind of coming to me in the middle, and then, da-da, I become conscious of it. That's kind of how it seems, and a lot of science has worked on that assumption for a very long time, a sort of bottom-up way of understanding what perception and thinking are. Instead of that, we see it as a top-down process. So in predictive processing theory, the brain is trying to make a prediction about what it's going to see or hear next, and then updating the predictions according to the information that comes in. You could say, many people call this a controlled hallucination. Not to take a negative view of hallucinations, perhaps imagery is a better idea. So the brain is constantly hallucinating or imagining what's out there in the world and then testing that hallucination against the input. So looked at it at the level of the brain, what's happening is the brain is a massively hierarchical system, and at every level, the neurons on that level are trying to predict what's coming in from the next level below. If they're successful and they got it exactly right, nothing happens. If they get it wrong and the prediction is slightly off, an error message goes up to it goes further into the brain. So rather than the outside information going all the way up, all that's going up is error messages, and the real work the brain's doing is constructing guesses about what the world is like. In doing that, in being able to do that, thank you, in being able to do that, it has to create a model of the world. And that word is commonly used in talking about this kind of stuff. The brain is modeling the world and testing its models against reality, whatever that reality is. And this is going on at multiple levels. And in a human brain, which is particularly complicated, there are a huge number of such levels. Now, I really like the work of Shamil Chandaria, and I recommend his lecture from which I've taken these slides. So here he's showing a representation of what I've just described, hierarchical predictive processing. At the bottom of this hierarchy, we have the sensory system. So you can imagine in, let's say in V1, in the visual system, in the occipital lobe, all the testing is to do with lines and corners and edges and simple things like that. A little further up, it'll be shapes. And all of these layers are predicting what's coming in at the lower level. And higher than that, it'll be object recognition, going to temporal lobes with actually people and houses and animals and whatever objects. And going up higher, it will be ideas and thinking and opinions and so on. Now, one of the principles in Bayesian mathematics and the Bayesian brain idea is that you take into consideration prior expectations. So those are called priors. So you have the information coming in and the priors going down, saying what they're guessing there is there. And the high-level priors will contain all sorts of ideas about the world. So you, as a functioning human being, have massive high-level priors about the nature of chairs and tables and what the time is and what lecture you want to go to and all of those things. But they're all feeding down through this whole system as the information comes in. Yeah, I did mean to go to that lecture. Oh, no, whoops, I didn't. I'll go to the other one, whatever that might be. Now, just think about this pyramid. And it's getting smaller at the top, so there's a lot of more stuff going on at the very low levels in terms of the neurons and so on. But at the top, now, is there really a top? Probably not. It's probably more like a tangled hierarchy, and probably what's at the top is constantly shifting as well, so don't think of this as too rigid. But somewhere around in the top levels is the great self model. I've already alluded to this, and I expect that all of you psychonauts and people interested in such things and meditators and what have you will be very familiar with the idea that the self is not what it seems to be. I've been practicing Zen. I'm not a Buddhist, but I've been practicing Zen for 45 years, nearly 50. And what the Buddha saw, fundamental to what the Buddha saw, anatta, or no self, is not that there is no self, that the self is not what we think it is. And we're finding this all the time thinking about consciousness. Things are not what we think it is. And if we feel that we are a continuing entity that kind of has control and takes in the information and sees it, we're wrong. Selves are not like that. They kind of pop up every so often. They come and go. Somebody alluded the other day, and I'm so bad at remembering people, I'm really sorry, to how in Tibetan Buddhism there's reincarnation, like in a lifetime, a self that migrates from life to life, which would go completely against what the Buddha taught. So why do people think that? An alternative, as was mentioned by this person, is this person here by any chance? Is that the self is simply pops up again and again and again. So earlier on, are you conscious now? Did any of you get that strange feeling of this shift that suddenly you've appeared? So this would be the self coming and going. Whenever we become mindful, there's a self model back, and then we can actually think about letting it go, but that's another thing. So I think this is very commonly accepted now in neuroscience and psychology, but it's still difficult because we still, excuse me, we still feel ourselves to be this entity who's in there, who's having the experiences and having control. There is, of course, Dan Dennett's idea of the Cartesian theatre. He said in this 1991 book that even scientists who say they're not dualists still imagine this sort of theatre in the mind where I'm sitting and I'm having the visions and I'm pulling the levers and in control. And he said there is no audience in the Cartesian theatre. That's a myth. The self is not what it seems to be, which is a fundamental part of illusionism. Thank you. And then there's Thomas Metzinger, who said in his wonderful book, The Ego Tunnel, and other books, selves just seem to be real and continuous because we confuse our phenomenal self-model with what it represents. Now, I couldn't resist showing you this slide. Now, we're talking here the mid-80s again. I should tell you, I lived in Germany then for a year, and I got a letter, yes, there was no email or anything, a letter from this young man called Thomas Metzinger, who I'd written a book then in 1982, with an explanation of out-of-body experiences, because I'd had dramatic out-of-body experience, in natural terms. Nothing's leaving the body. And he was so angry because he knew he'd left his body, and he wanted to come and meet me and tell me I'm wrong. Anyway, here's one of my first pictures of Thomas Metzinger. That's in my greenhouse in Somerset. And of course, he and I have changed quite a lot. Here we are at ICPR in Harlem last summer. So that's been a very long and wonderful friendship, although I don't see him very often. Now, I've probably got about 3 minutes left, 4 maybe, to come to the point really of all of this, which is to apply this kind of thinking about mental models to how those models change. You would think if we're talking about altered states of consciousness, then studying consciousness would help. But as you've seen, it doesn't very much. But thinking about the models does. Fundamentally, the important thing is to realize that I am a model. And this gives us a completely different view on what it means when you look into people, the main consciousness researchers, Bernie Bars and so on, are always talking about conscious processes and unconscious processes, conscious experiences and unconscious experiences, parts of the brain that are conscious and parts of the brain that are not conscious. This is deeply problematic, and I think this is, I completely go against this. Because what I'm saying is, if we take this model-based view, is that what we mean by something being conscious is it's become part of my self-model, that it's what's going on at the moment. This is similar to multiple drafts theory, if you know about that, Dennett's multiple drafts theory, but it's not quite the same, because he doesn't go as far as saying that what it's like is what it's like to be those models. So I'm saying that when we call something conscious, we're saying it's because it has become modeled as being part of the self-model. And this gives us a different view. And I'm back now to Chandaria again, because he takes this view and looks at what happens with the dissolution of the self, whether that is through dreaming, through long practice of meditation, through natural mystical experiences, or with psychedelics. And he looks at how let's stick with psychedelics, how the psychedelics weaken the connections with the self-model, or this whole structure of the self-model can fall apart. And you can see there in this diagram of the pyramid, if the high-level priors stop being so rigid, stop saying, I'm here and this is me and I'm experiencing this, then the experience changes, because, I would say, that's what we are and that's what we're conscious of, is those models. And that can actually disappear. The whole of the self-model can loosen to the extent when it's gone. And I'm sure a lot of you have had experiences like that with psychedelics, if not with other things, and probably I know a lot of you are meditators as well. It's not so often that it just disappears, but that it weakens and gradually, and then it can completely disappear. And then it's really difficult. There was a lovely talk yesterday about unitive experiences and loss of self and so on, and this problem of how you describe such experiences, because you weren't there at the time. And so how do you remember it later to describe? 1 minute, thank you. And so that's what's happening. But then you have the question of how it comes back, and that is reconstructing the self. And Chandaria's idea here, and I would agree with him, is that once those high-level priors have been loosened, once they've been destroyed once, they can come back, but they never come back quite as rigidly. They're much more flexible, much more changeable, and this is what is happening with psychedelics as well as with these other things. And that, I think, helps me in my meditation practice. I've had many experiences of self-dissolution or partial self-dissolution through meditation, and more dramatically with some psychedelic experiences. And I find this very helpful indeed. So I urge you at least to consider, I know this might be mad and it is going right against the grain as far as consciousness studies is concerned, but from that early experience of you have to take the top layers off, I can now see exactly what that meant. The brain is a hierarchical system. The top layers include this massive, illusory, confused idea of a self who's so important and is in charge, and that can go. And so I will urge you to enjoy thinking about that and to keep on asking yourself, what is it like to be me now?